So here's the truth. I'm tired, but not like the didn't get enough sleep tired, although I have that too. I mean, the kind of exhaustion that feels like it's stitched into your bones. So for me, that's perimenopause. And honestly, also the high doses of GLP-1s haven't helped. And so I kept thinking, am I missing something? And it turns out, yeah, we naturally have NAD in our bodies. It's essential for energy, cellular repair, brain function. But as we age, we lose it, which of course is not fun. No bueno. That's why I've added NAD plus back in, and I've been going through Shed, which is a telehealth to do it, because this season of my life is about putting back what time or meds have taken from me. I'm not ashamed of it. Whether it's GLP-1, HRT, or NAD, I'm rebuilding the energy that I deserve to have. Now, listen, I'm not a doctor and I don't pretend to be one on this podcast. I always recommend checking with your medical provider to see if NAD is right for you. But if you go through Shed, you will meet with a licensed provider to be able to guide you safely. If you're feeling the same bone deep fatigue like I am, check out the NAD Plus with Shed. If you use my code, which is Kim40 at checkout, you're going to save 40%. It's also linked in my link tree. There's no shame in my game, just science support and reclaiming what's mine. I hope it works for you too. Okay. Sorry, Kat, ask your question.
You're fine. That's fine. No sorry's needed. Your platform, I got to lurk on your platform a little bit, and it was fun. Your platform on, of course, is heart health and obesity management, and we know all that we're all under we have the impression, or we know that obesity management does help with your heart health, can help strengthen our hearts. But could you actually give us some specifics, like some of the specific correlations of heart
Yeah.
issues and obesity and how they develop over time?
Great question. I mean, it's like one of those things where like everyone knows that there's a link, but like what exactly is the link? What are the
Exactly.
steps? And like
Yeah.
how big is this effect, right? I mean, I actually find this is like really powerful information to share, not to like add to any shame or anything, but just to also like help motivate people as they're starting to catalyze their journey and starting to have some progress, whether it's medication assisted or not. So, I mean, I think zooming way out, big picture,
Mhm.
let's just start with obesity reduces life expectancy. It cuts off years of your life, okay? And I mean, I think the clearest way that we saw this is like life expectancy in the United States was increasing for 160 years. And then we hit the early 2020s, okay, when like everything got so much harder for so many reasons, and it decreased for the first time. There were a whole bunch that really hit the headlines. And this was attributed to like the opiate pandemic, COVID, obviously, mental
Mhm.
health issues with increasing suicide rates. But what no one was really talking about was also obesity. Obesity rates had really been increasing in the background. And just to like in the spirit of specifics, I mean, if you're in the BMI range of 30 to 35, your survival is reduced by like 2 to 4 years. If you're in the 40 to 45 range, your survival is reduced by 8 to 10 years. So these are really powerful depressing effects on life expectancy. And that, many believe was also driving down the first time decrease in our country's life expectancy. I think it's important to note a little asterisk here is that obviously there's obesity defined in terms of BMI, but we all know that BMI is not a perfect metric, and that, the fat tissue deposition, distribution and around the abdomen and
Mhm.
abdominal adiposity really matters a lot. That sort of is what is biologically linked to like insulin resistance, cholesterol issues, and heart disease risk. And so there is, of course, a big association there. But like, so why is this happening? Why is obesity so lethal, and so
Mhm.
dangerous? And the reason, what we say in cardiology is that obesity counts twice when it comes to heart health or heart disease risk, because it by itself is a risk factor for heart disease. And I'll get into that shortly. But not only that, it's also driving all of the heart disease risk factors that are not obesity. So it's kind of like, doubly risky. And so what are the things that it drives that are heart disease risk factors? These are what we call cardiometabolic diseases. Obesity is one, but here are the other risk factors. Type 2 diabetes, okay, which is a problem related to insulin resistance. And, there's research out there saying that more than 80% of type 2 diabetes out there is attributable to diabetes. So, for numbers, and that, like weight loss around 15%, which is very hard to achieve without medication assistance, like with GLP-1s.
Yeah.
But if you're able to get there, it can actually lead to reversal of diabetes in nearly half of the people who are in that bucket of that category of weight loss. So there's diabetes, there's high blood pressure. We see high blood pressure is so prevalent. It's like 1 in 2 adults have it, but among people who have obesity, it's definitely at least half of the population. So, that's a big risk factor there. High cholesterol and abnormal fatty lipids, which we call triglycerides. And then there's also sleep disorders. So obstructive sleep apnea is very closely linked to weight. And on the other side, very closely linked to all kinds of cardiovascular problems, whether it's high blood pressure, again, creating this sort of vicious cycle of risk, or arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, which increase your risk of stroke, coronary artery disease like heart attacks. So, all those risk factors are driven by obesity, and then out the other side are driving heart disease. But as we said before, obesity also drives heart disease itself. It's an independent risk factor for heart disease. And so heart disease is this really big category of things, which again, like I feel like the medical establishment, healthcare professionals don't do a good enough job of explaining, like, what do we mean when we say heart disease and what exactly are we talking about? So the big buckets are coronary artery disease, which refers to cholesterol blockages building up in your arteries. And the fear is that they, rupture, they become unstable and cause a heart attack. Obviously, the kind of heart attack that Priscilla was talking about at the top of the episode is sort of a, happened by a different mechanism, but we can probably get to it later, how this may still kind of, link together a bunch of the different biological effects of obesity. So blockages leading to heart attacks. And the other big bucket is heart failure. And then there's sort of like arrhythmias, electrical problems that can lead to sudden, death related to the heart. And so for coronary artery disease, blockages and heart attacks, when you look at these massive meta-analyses that pull together all the research from dozens of trials representing tens of thousands of patients, they looked at we look at the connection between BMI and coronary artery disease, and there's a 29% increase in new coronary artery disease for every 5-unit increase in your BMI. It's crazy. Again, there's a lot of data to suggest that this is worse when you have that BMI distributed around your abdomen. And, it's because of everything we know, the cholesterol, the inflammation, obesity also with like the problems with insulin increases the activation of your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response, which increases your heart rate and your blood pressure. Again, just like vicious cycle. And then there's heart failure. So this is really interesting and very important in terms of like how common it is. There's the kind of heart failure where your heart just gets kind of like big, baggy, and weak. Sounds terrible, but like we call that heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. That's a weak heart. But the much more common kind of heart failure is heart failure with normal strength, just kind of stiff. And that's very common in obesity. So that kind of heart failure, the risk of getting it is increased twofold in people who have obesity compared to people who do not. There's more that we can say about, the unit increase for every unit increase in BMI, but like what's going on there? I mean, there's just so much pressure on the heart from the excess weight itself. And then of course, obesity increases how much volume you have in your blood because you need more blood to like feed a bigger body. So your heart is getting overloaded. It's like, being overpumped full of blood, which causes it to kind of try to change its shape to accommodate all that blood. And it gets a little bit thicker and stiffer. On the other side of things, you have high blood pressure frequently from obesity, and that's kind of like kinking a garden hose and then trying to pump against it. So that adds more stress in the direction of a thickened, stiff heart muscle. And we see this, on all kinds of cardiac testing that Priscilla probably had a lot of, like echocardiograms and, now they're cardiac MRIs, which can show that there's scarring related to this. There's fibrosis related to this. So that's how you end up with heart failure. And finally, there's some evidence, growing evidence, that there might be like increased risk of arrhythmia with obesity. One of the most common is atrial fibrillation, which we were talking about before, can cause stroke because of blood kind of pooling in a top
Mhm.
chamber of the heart that's not really pumping well. But there's also issues with more dangerous arrhythmias that is under exploration right now, but might explain sort of sudden cardiac death. So there's a big connection. My mantra around all of this is that weight is heart health. I mean, it's not just a risk factor. It independently drives heart disease. It changes sort of how the heart functions, even if you've never had a cardiac event, and it's driving all these other risk factors. So that's sort of, long answer, but hopefully one that, satisfies the need to have a little bit more data, a little bit more
Mhm.
specifics, as opposed to just, this isn't good for your heart.
Month to month, box to box. This is how we live in the GLP-1 community. We never know when our coverage is going to get yanked from underneath us. Last year, it got yanked out from underneath me, and I had to go the compound route. I had to go to a telehealth. And what alleviated that financial burden a little bit for me was using my HSA card. I went to the hsastore.com to look for some electrolytes. ShedRx is there. ShedRx, the telehealth, is HSA approved and FSA approved. Ah! So I'm going to ShedRx, right? And I'm going to use my HSA, which alleviates a huge financial burden for me. And if you're interested as well, go to shedrx.com. They'll take great care of you. They've got fantastic doctors. And you can use the link down below in our link tree, or just go to shedrx.com and use my code, CAT50. Get your $50 off your first month.